Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and welcome to my review of H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon, also known as the Best Weird Tales of H.P. Lovecraft Commemorative Edition. I'll first talk about the book itself, which is a wonderful hardcover filled with beautifully haunting illustrations, and encompasses all of Lovecraft's most popular short stories and novellas. So you get At the Mountains of Madness, The Shadow over Innsmouth, The Shadow Out of Time, and many more. I personally picked this book up because while I've always been a fan of Lovecraftian horror, I'd never actually read any of his works. I was familiar with it, but had never actively read his words directly. The last thing I'll say before I get into the review is that Lovecraft was an odd man to say the least. I'm not going to get into his beliefs or controversies, but I will say that when it comes to his writing, he was anal and meticulous regarding each word put to the page. When he first sent some manuscripts in to be published, he attached a note that said, and I quote, "If the tale cannot be printed as written, down to the very last semicolon and comma, it must gracefully accept rejection." It does not help that Lovecraft was adamant in not resubmitting previously rejected works. If you wish to read the Necronomicon, the first thing I'll say is that you must be prepared for the structure. These works were written mostly in the 1930s and 40s, and as such the writing is of a sort that many may not be familiar with today. Not to say that it's illegible or hard to decipher like Shakespeare, but rather that it takes more focus to get through than you might need were you to read a book from our decade. It isn't bad, but it can make the experience of reading his works long and arduous. But enough about that, let's get on to the stories themselves. Honestly, I found them to have problems. This may be a problem with me, but my eyes glaze over anytime I reach paragraphs on end of description. It's the reason I've never managed to finish reading The Hobbit. Curse you, enchanted forest! It's doubly difficult with Lovecraft because the nature of Lovecraftian horror is at odds with the medium itself. You always hear about people wanting to get Lovecraft stories made into movies. Guillermo del Toro has been trying to get At the Mountains of Madness made for goodness knows how many years, but the problem they always run into is, how can we show on screen things which are by nature made to be unexplainable or unimaginable? The best we've been able to do are some Lovecraftian games where your screen gets blurry when you notice something Lovecraftian, so you can never get a good view. That works to a degree in games because you're controlling your character and can move away and act out avoiding it or running away. Having to sit and watch a movie where you can't see anything when the scary creature appears is just annoying. Remember that scene in Cloverfield where they're running from the creatures on the train tracks and the camera is just pointed at the ground? Or that scene in As Above, So Below, where it's just a scene of the camera pointed at nothing and shaking nonstop? It's not interesting, it's not scary, it's annoying. You get that same problem with Lovecraft's short stories. I'll outright say that his novellas are magnitudes better, and the best part of his repertoire. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the Necronomicon are his short stories, and all I can say is at least they're short. So much becomes pointless with vast descriptions of unknowable and incomprehensible creatures when the whole point is that you can't comprehend them. There's one short story where he takes pages trying to describe a color that does not exist. In one sentence, I can tell you it's a color that does not exist, and you understand what I'm saying. But if I then go on for 2 pages trying to describe it, I'm just wasting time, since by its nature you cannot picture a color that doesn't exist and have no basis for imagining it. It's literally a waste of time. That's how I feel for a lot of the stories in this anthology. Ultimately, I'm glad I read it. I'd always been immersed in Lovecraftian mythology, whether it was South Park, the Call of Cthulhu games, or any other piece of media that took inspiration from it, which is plenty. I'm glad I can now say that I've read the source material, but if someone were to ask me if they should read Lovecraft's works for the sake of pure enjoyment, I'd say no, it's just not worth it. But if you really want to be able to say that you've read his stories, then I would point you to his novellas. The Call of Cthulhu, The Shadow over Innsmouth, At the Mountains of Madness. There's a reason these are his most well-known works. If you want to read something Lovecraft-inspired, then may I recommend Daryl Gregory's Harrison Squared. It's a story about a teenager named Harrison who ends up in the coastal town of Dunsmouth, which is inhabited by strange fish-looking people. When his mother takes a boat out on the water, she mysteriously disappears. Can Harrison discover the truth of what happened to his mother and potentially save the world from disaster? I personally love that book, and if you can get your hands on it, there's a novella called We Are All Completely Fine, which sees the return of Harrison. But Grim, you tell me, I absolutely positively must read Lovecraft's traditional works without actually trying to muddle through his prose. Well, you're in luck, listener. There may, or may not, be a series of Lovecraft stories made into manga form which you can find translated online. Some have been finished, some haven't. Finished may include The Color Out of Space, The Outsider, and The Haunter of the Dark. Unfinished may include At the Mountains of Madness and The Shadow Out of Time. I won't tell you where to find them, but a simple Google search will get you there. I personally believe this is the best way to consume Lovecraft stories, since you get the plot of the story and the pages of description are instead integrated into the drawings. It doesn't solve the problem of how to depict something that by design is meant to be impossible to depict, but I think it's the best we'll ever get. That's it for me. I hope you have a spooky Halloween. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.